Greetings, everyone. Before I launch into my weekly monologue, can I please remind you to check out my patreon.com site, and not just to check it out, but to join it. It's by signing up and joining and parting with some cash that you make a meaningful demonstration of support for the channel and everything I try to do here. It costs about the price of a cup of coffee every month, but in return you get early access to all my new content, and you get exclusive access to a super fun question and answer session with me every week. It's great, I promise you. So join up, stir yourself into the mix, and help make it even better by being there. Okay, now it's time for the aforementioned monologue. It seems pretty clear to me that the way the world used to be, the world we've known, is coming to an end, and that something different is beginning. You know, W.B. Yeats, some rough beast slouches towards Bethlehem to be born and all that. I mean it, the thought that something's ending and something's coming. Difficult though that thought may be to take in. The nature and scale of the change feels that big, though. It feels that momentous. Geopolitically, we've been living for some decades now in the age of America. Since the end of the Cold War, America has basically had its way with the world, pushing everyone else around because it could, and frankly because there was no one big enough to stop it doing so. By now, I think if you were being reasonable and fair, you'd have to say it hasn't been pretty. One war after another, dozens of them, one coup after another, one regime change after another. Anytime America had a problem with a head of state or the way a country was conducting its affairs, then, well, that head was cut off, metaphorically speaking at least, and those affairs were realigned to suit American interests. Some called it Pax Americana, which is a bit rich given that so many experienced so very little pax, so very little peace. But now change is in the air. America is falling, or rather it's been pushed over. Hard to say by whom, and maybe from within. But on the rise are China, Russia, the BRICS nations, perhaps, forging new alliances, a new era of cooperation that threatens the end of the petrodollar, and so the end of the US dollar and the end of American hegemony. We are moving inexorably from a unipolar world in which the United States of America was the unipole to a multipolar world of multiple players. Who knows? Maybe we actually are dealing with the long-heralded dawning of the age of Aquarius. Now, I know how that sounds, woo-woo, to put it mildly, but hear me out. Astrologically speaking, we've been in the age of Pisces since the time of the birth and death of Jesus Christ. If astrology is your bag, then the age of Pisces was supposed to have been about compassion and intuitiveness and imagination, but also, on the flip side, about idealism, oversensitiveness, laziness, pessimism. Make of that what you will, but the age of Aquarius is predicted, at least by psychoanalyst Carl Jung, to be a time of darkness and spiritual deficiency for the human species as a whole. To quote him, it will no longer be possible to write off evil as the mere privation of good. Its real existence will have to be recognised in the age of Aquarius. Jung went so far as to say the age of Aquarius comes before the arrival of the Antichrist. Who knows? Not me, that's for sure. I certainly don't know. But if we are in a time of change, possibly momentous change, we owe it to ourselves, I would say, to look up from our day-to-day challenges and cares and contemplate what might be coming our way. based on what's happening in the world and how it's happening. Events in the Middle East are ugly, to put it mildly. Slaughter of women and children on a grand scale. What was limited to Gaza has spread to the Lebanon. Many observers celebrated the exploding of thousands of pagers in random pockets, in random places, in taxis, in grocery stores, on the streets. It's hard to imagine action being taken like that anywhere else by anyone else and it not being described as terrorism. But the mouthpieces of the world order, the so-called rules-based world order we're told we live under, have said and done nothing much in response. More recently, Israel assassinated Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah by hitting 4 residential buildings in a Beirut suburb with 2,000-pound bombs, amongst other ordnance. Estimates of the number killed alongside Nasrallah, civilians among them, range from 11 to 300, depending on what you read and who you listen to. A casual glance at the smoking craters left behind by the massive strike would likely result in the assessment that Nasrallah was killed because he's a terrorist in charge of terrorists. In fact, according to Israel itself, the hit was carried out because Nasrallah had refused to abandon Gaza on the road to any diplomatic solution to end the fighting on the border between Israel and Lebanon. An Israeli spokesman said, "What we found after over 11 months is that Nasrallah is persistent in tying himself and the hijacked Lebanese state that he took over to whatever's going on in Gaza. He declined every diplomatic effort, he declined messages to stop connecting himself to Gaza, and he continued to fire at Israel, and in the past few weeks or even months, even expanded range and velocity of attacks against Israel. This led us to understand that he cannot be part of the game anymore." And so Nasrallah is no more. What I'm troubled by most of all, the politics of that region are just beyond me. But what I'm troubled by most of all is the way violent things happening now around the world, all over the world, are being accepted as normal. The ugliness in Ukraine, where by now the hundreds of thousands are butchered, not in defence of democracy, but for profit. And that exercise just grinds on remorselessly. It's a bottomless pit. In the US, citizens whose lives have been destroyed or at least upended by a hurricane are given minimal help by the government, while yet more billions of dollars worth of support are sent out to Ukraine. In the UK, while pensioners prepare to shiver to death without the minimal relief of cold weather payments, the cold weather subsidy, and while communities are devastated by torrents of migrants, and while the cost of living crisis bites ever deeper, and while the freshly minted Labour government is led by characters on the make and on the take in the form of freebies, who simultaneously promise life must be made harder this winter by a tax hiking budget, billions of pounds are promised to Ukraine, promised forever. We're led by warmongers, by those who would help themselves to designer clothes and more besides, while fellow citizens shiver and go hungry. It's ugly all over, devoid of compassion, devoid of pity. And yet these are the signs we are given to read, the tea leaves, if you will, left in the cup for us to interpret. Always beneath, barely hidden, and perhaps soon to be fully revealed for all to deal with, are rumours of depravity, degradation of the human spirit, all the way down to the trafficking, abuse, and murder of children. Arnaud Bertrand, who's a Jewish Frenchman living in China, wrote very powerfully this week about the need to consider where we are all going, how we are all behaving. Because it's about shared responsibility for the way the world is. In fact, it's Bertrand's theme that I'm echoing here now. He wrote, "Every one of us bears responsibility for the world we're creating through the actions we let happen. Do we want a world underwritten by anything goes and might makes right? Do we want to step into an unprecedentedly nihilistic order? Or do we want a world with a vision for a shared future for mankind, underwritten by common principles, a world that makes us somewhat proud to be human?" End quote. Now, whenever I lament the plight of America and of Americans, I'm careful to remember and to say that I truly love the idea of America. The idea that's encapsulated in the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution and in the Bill of Rights. I honestly believe the world needs the idea of America, an idea as yet unrealised and unfulfilled, but still possible. If the American empire we have known is dying, and it may be, then perhaps we can console ourselves that what is dying is not really America. Certainly not that ideal America, but rather some parasite that invaded the true American host a long time ago. Back in the days before I realised Robert De Niro was a silly I loved his 1986 film The Mission, about a Jesuit priest, played by English actor Jeremy Irons, endeavouring to convert to Catholicism some indigenous people living in the jungle of Paraguay. The tribespeople, called the Guarani, are desired as slaves by both Spain and Portugal, and under pressure from the state's representatives, the Catholic Church abandons them to their fate. De Niro's character, Rodrigo, a reformed mercenary and slave hunter, wants to fight the approaching Spanish and Portuguese soldiers, but Father Gabriel, played by Jeremy Irons, the priest who sort of first settled among the Guarani, refuses to resort to violence. He says, "If might is right, then love has no place in the world. It may be so, but I don't have the strength to live in a world like that, Rodrigo." The Mission is set in the 18th century, so that's another different world. The world as it was when science and reason were on the rise. Now, in the film, once the worst has happened, when Rodrigo and Gabriel and the rest of the priests are dead, and most of the Guarani are dead as well or taken as slaves, there's a final exchange between Hontar, who's the emissary for the Portuguese, and Cardinal Altamirano, who's another Jesuit, there representing the Pope. "We must work in the world," says Hontar. "The world is thus." To which the Cardinal replies, "No, thus have we made the world. Thus have I made it." Who knows if it's the dawning of the age of Aquarius? But like the astrological signs, everything moves in circles and cycles. Everything is connected to everything else. Patterns repeat. It takes 25,000 years for the sun to complete its passage through all 12 signs of the zodiac. That's a period known as the Great Year. Every day, a human being takes 25,000 breaths. The biblical lifespan of 70 years and 10 amounts to 25,000 days. The world turns, the sky turns, we live and breathe. We really need an age not of evil and darkness and spiritual deficiency, but an age of togetherness for all mankind.